right. The meeting of the Ojai Building Appeals Board will be called to order on Wednesday, May 9, 2018 at 6 p.m. in the City Council chambers of the City, of Ojai City Hall. Member Members of the public wishing to address the Building Appeals Board on items appearing on the agenda are requested to complete a speaker's card and file it with the secretary. Cards are available in the lobby. Speakers should state their name and address for the record and limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. Comments must be directed to the board, not the audience. And while the Building Appeals Board is in session, all in attendance are expected to maintain order and decorum and to obey the orders of the chair. All right, we'll start with the roll call.
Okay. Chair Ulrich.
Here.
Member Farmer.
Here.
Member Murphy. Here. And myself, I'm here, and Member Daddy will be a little late, but he's coming.
Yes, it's my understanding he's making a presentation to the school board this evening. All right, Pledge of Allegiance. Vice Chair.
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Very effectively done. Okay, public communications. Is there anyone who would like to speak generally? Okay, there does not appearing to be none. No public communications. We'll start with the building officials report.
Nothing to report at this time.
Okay, we have consent items next. The minutes from the December 19th meeting and the minutes of the January 16 meeting. Do we have any comment or a motion?
Yes, I make a motion that we accept both. I've gone over them. I think we should accept both.
Okay.
I will second that.
Very good. In that case, then, do we need a roll call on that, or is that just a? I don't think so. Okay, we'll just take a voice vote. Approved? Okay. Right. Discussion item number 3, the fire hazard map. Recommendation: discuss the development of the city's fire hazard map by the committee formed at April 11, 2018 Building Appeals Board meeting to depict the city's unique geographic, topological, and climatic conditions. Okay, so at this point, I think, is there any report, any comments from staff?
No comments. I believe we were just accepting the recommendation.
Okay, and the recommendation is to review the draft building, I'm looking at discussion item number 4, sorry. And the recommendation is just, there is no recommendation besides to adopt. Am I missing something?
Well, it's not this page.
Yeah, it's just the recommendation. I think you read it, that to discuss
Just
the
in
development.
the agenda, in
Right,
other words. Okay,
right.
once again, that is to discuss the development of the city's fire hazard map by the committee formed at April 11, 2018 Building Appeals Board meeting to depict the city's unique geographic, topological, and climate conditions. Since the committee was effectively Board Member Daddy and myself, and Board Member Daddy's not present here, I can address, I can at least start the discussion of this item.
Just delay it until.
Well, no, there's quite a bit to it, and he indicates he'll be here. We can always postpone it once we get a little further into it. The mission statement relative to the, and we're going to refer to this as a fire hazard map for Ojai City, is to prepare a hazard map with options for consideration, and it'll identify the criteria for hazardous places or zones which will include high, moderate, and low hazard designations, which our present map doesn't contain. And just to recapitulate, maybe familiar to everyone in this room, but for members of the public that are not familiar with it, the city has, by default, hasn't actually formally adopted it, but it was adopted by act of state law, a map that was generated by CAL FIRE in 2007 that is has been fairly universally agreed is insufficient, not accurate, and does not provide the necessary information for the development of either a city that is, if not fire safe, more fire safe, and very specifically building codes that would and should reflect the fire hazard that isn't accurately depicted. Our committee developed a vision statement, which is to determine if a broad-scale option is a valid method to achieve the most desirable map or a specific location map is preferable. And there's a Japanese proverb that addresses this. Vision without action is a daydream. Action without vision is a nightmare. So, ostensibly, our purpose here is to develop a map that will couple vision with action, and this has not occurred previously. So, this map that we're addressing is effectively 11 years old, and would be time for an update, notwithstanding, especially in light of our recent experiences relative to wildfires. That having been said, wildfire type to consider in the hazardous designation is defined as wind and ember-dominated situation, like the Thomas Fire, that was beyond the threshold of control at the head of the fire. And the topography ruled that the fire topography ruled the fire flanks and the heel of the Thomas Fire. Fuels, fire type. Fires that are too hot to suppress by direct attack requiring a sacrifice of property. And in short, the fire overwhelmed all resources. And in order to implement a methodology that produces a map with gradations, we're aspiring to develop a map that has high, medium, and low hazards. This map goes high hazard to no hazard and is not, by definition, accurate to the conditions, the topography, and specifically the structures in the community, which are the most densely massed habitations that are directly adjacent to fuel loads. The methodology used to arrive at this was using an expert opinion. We have the benefit of a fire behavioral expert in the community, Mr. Campbell. We use existing fire models, which is such as the Behave model. We develop a program for Ojai that includes layers for water delivery, as well as other existing information by incorporating the program designed in outline form, or a combination of all of the above. An option to approach this is, there's actually three options that we develop. One is a broad-scale hazard map that encompasses the structures that are within the city. Option two is an inspection of specific areas posing high, medium, and low hazards based upon protective systems such as water delivery, road access, and hazardous fuel accumulations. Board Member Daddy and myself have together and independently enacted inspections of specific areas within the city's sphere of interest, as well as the city, within the city limits proper, and come to several conclusions regarding water delivery, road access, and hazardous fuel accumulations. And then the third option is a house-by-house evaluation of fire risk to others determined by an inspection of the property, which would be a little too much for us to do in any case. Might be done sometime in the future if further fine-tuning of a map is necessary. And the real world, for those who are members of the public, the real world implications of this map have to do with insurance, have to do with building code requirements, and have to do with the suitability of certain structures that may be adjacent to high fire hazard zones, as well as fuel clearance. A list of specific hazards was developed. That's firewood location to structures, wooden fences, which are a wick to adjacent properties, fire-prone plants and trees, which are a threat to and on property and adjacent properties, access and egress constrictions for firefighting assets, structural weaknesses such as skylights, ember screens, and roofing material, and structure siding prone to ignition from ember or fire environment. There's some other general, actually kind of specific recommendations we come to, but one of them that kind of jumps out on things is the geographic information system and mapping. Is staff aware of whether we have GIS mapping for our fire system?
City does not have GIS mapping for fire. The Ventura County Fire District may, but the city does not have it internally.
Okay. Right. That's a recommendation for the city to at least investigate. I think there's a lot of support from the county to providing that service, and that since it's not just it's an integration of hardware, software, and data for capturing, managing, analyzing, and displaying all forms of geographically referenced information, which includes structures, it includes fire system, it includes fuel. It's certainly a worthy thing that is supported by local government as well as the state. So, do you have anything in particular you'd like to add immediately upon your entry?
Having only heard the last 60 seconds, yes. Thank God it wasn't longer. I'd have a lot more to say. We have a longtime planning commissioner in the audience. And this planning commissioner has a tremendous amount of knowledge on the GIS system and proposal and the money. And what I would say is not now, but later we need to get some of that information. Money was allocated from the city for a GIS study that never came to fruition.
When was that?
Commissioner Nolan, maybe you could come up here and explain that, because you were the one that was given that.
Yes, Kathy Nolan, Planning Commissioner. I believe that was in 2011. Our Complete Streets Subcommittee had actually asked to get a GIS program initiated with the city. The city actually had the software and they had it loaded on their computers, but it was outdated. And nobody had the training, the staff didn't have the training to use it. So we actually were awarded, don't quote me on the dollar amount, but it was $4,000 and something dollars, somewhere between that and $4,000 and $5,000 by city council. So they actually purchased the software. SCAG came and did like a one-day workshop, maybe it was 2 days, a 1 or 2 day workshop with us. But I still don't believe anyone in the city has the ability to run the program, so to speak. But part of the reason we got it for Complete Streets was, and it wasn't just for Complete Streets, by having a GIS program, you can have layers for utilities, sewer, fire, anything that's going on the street, stormwater capture, street trees. And so whenever you're doing something, fire hydrants can be on there. You have everything that you need is on there, and you can turn the layers off and on. But when you're going to do a project, if there's an issue or even a project that's coming through the city, you can actually look and go, okay, here's what's there, or determine if something's missing. So I'm in agreement. I wish we had that program or that it was functioning, but that's just kind of the backstory on it.
Okay, so if I get this correct, if I absorbed it correctly, the city had software, albeit outdated. There was a grant from...
They initially had the software loaded on several of the staff computers, and it was outdated. They purchased an upgrade. Well, of course, by now, that was in 2011. I'm sure there's been numerous upgrades since then. But they loaded it with the intention of they were going to get an intern or a staff person in the planning department, and that was going to be one of the criteria that they could operate the GIS, but that didn't happen. So it's just been dormant. And
Right, so I'm
nothing's
just looking at what the elements are, though. There was software and there was a grant. There was grant monies?
No.
Okay.
The city council actually agreed, let me step back. I came to give a report on Complete Streets one night. I didn't even ask for the money. I stated that it would be a good thing to have the GIS program, and I actually had got some quotes and included it, but I didn't even come out and ask for it. But at the end of the meeting, they all agreed that they wanted to award us the funding, so it would come out of the city coffer, so to speak. It wasn't a grant.
Okay,
Yeah.
right. So in other words, funds allocated then,
Yes.
or at least an offer.
Oh, it's in the minutes somewhere.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so at this point,
Yeah, so the program, we had the availability in 2011, but nobody implemented it, but it was there, is that right?
Yeah, and I'm not sure, it was in 2011, I believe is when they did it. Could have been 2012. But the software, I believe, is still loaded on the computers. It's probably, once again, outdated. Then the real question is, can you upgrade it? Of course you can. And then to have somebody who knows how to operate the system.
okay, and since this is gonna become a recurring theme, so I'll just initiate it. The capability of a GIS system is, as you indicated, to have a real-time map of the utilities and actually including the water system that is beneath our streets, which is a critical element of the fire hazard map and the considerations that go into the production of it as far as the gradations of fire hazard risk. As well as the obvious stuff that we all can see, which is a fire hydrant. And if you look a little closer, perhaps the valve for the fire hydrant. In other words, I don't think anyone, certainly even myself, who's been looking at it for several years now, has any sense of what, and I built water systems, so I kind of know what they look like in a plan view. Have no concept of what the Ojai water system looks like. And having it on a system, a mapping system that would be able to indicate where there's a failure rather than just by, for example, or where there's a problem or a low
Right.
pressure or so any problem or concern or basically a conditional awareness can be referenced on a computer screen. We have no capability of that. We don't, to the best of my knowledge, and maybe Casitas might have it now that Golden State's gone, but there's no map that is visible, to be able to conceptually understand
What you're
where, the extent of the system and what its conditions are, should we receive reports, which we haven't been getting relative to the condition of the system.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and the nice thing about that program also is that you can not only have all those elements on layers, you can label them, but you can also put notes in there. So, for instance, if you had a fire hydrant, it was under the, PSI was under the requirement, you could have a note on there, so that one needed to get addressed. But I will say the city, and you'll have to check with Public Works Department, I believe they might have, I don't know if it's a sewer, it could be some other utilities on a GIS that they're using and other maps, but
Okay.
that would have to be checked out.
Right. Thank you. And since you have had a recent conversation with Casitas Municipal Water District Management, is there, you have any understanding whether their system's on a GIS?
I didn't ask that question, but they have completed the engineering study for the Golden State fire suppression system. They've done an analysis. They've marked all the hydrants. They have all the flows. They have the sizes. They have a plan for, I don't want to say removal because that's not correct. They have a plan for upgrading, replacing.
Is that going to be a public document?
I really don't. I really don't know. It should be. My understanding was that council directed the city manager to have a discussion with Casitas, and I guess that stuff's available. I could call, maybe put it in the paper if it is. They have a cost estimate. They have the information necessary to identify the real problems we have, which are the 2.5-inch wharf and the 4-inch wharf. And what I was told personally by the general manager of Casitas, we had a meeting with the general manager, the assistant, and the engineer and myself. And they plan to replace those and go from 2 to 4, 2.5 to 4, to a minimum of 6, because that's what we really need to get this system up to the 550 gallons a minute that we require, and to have the pressure. As a result of that meeting, every hydrant has been opened, tested, and every hydrant actually has water. Now, they didn't test the pressure and all that, but just knowing that the valves are open and that they're, and it was just, it seems to be the biggest thing, having valves open. The valves are open and there is water in 100% of them. That's been completed. The engineering report, the study, the cost analysis is all finished.
Yes.
So, do we know that they're all working? They've been tested. Do they know that they're all working?
They all have water. When you say working, some of them are not going to have very much pressure because they don't have the capacity to carry the water through the line, because the lines are 1928 lines.
Right.
They're very small lines.
Is that going to be corrected? Do you know?
That's going to all be replaced.
Replaced. And up to a minimum of 6-inch?
Minimum of 6-inch.
Okay, thank you.
You need to talk. That the majority of that money was already allocated in the initial bond that we put together at Flow. So, and that was the original reason for getting rid of Golden State, was we didn't, not that we wanted 12,000 square foot lawns. It's that we had 115 breaks a year, and we were losing 15% of all of our metered water through the system. And we didn't have standby fire suppression water when the time was necessary. We saw that a number of times, and that was the reason for that. The Casitas is also in the process of purchasing a machine that will turn the valves. The valves should be exercised every year, And so they'll turn them on and off so they don't stick, so we won't have the problems that we've had before, where we couldn't turn the one off at the Playhouse for 10 hours as it eroded. Did I answer that? Is there any other?
Well, my only concern with that is, and meaning no disrespect, is to any of the parties who were there at the meeting or your representation, is my question regarding whether Casitas' system as GIS is now what's in the city and ostensibly what's in the sphere of interest, sphere of influence, is all Casitas at this point. And ostensibly, they have the resources for to have both the software, current software, as well as technicians trained for it. So the question is, if and I'm going to presume that they have sufficient information, have given to a engineering firm who's doing an assessment of the system. That would involve paper, but I'm sure it also involves coordinates at this point. So, having said that, I would like someone should look into that, and if it ends up being me, that's great.
Could I make a motion for a recommendation, or are we going to do that later?
We can do that, because I've got several that are just related to the fire water.
I'm going to make a motion.
We'd have to have it agendized at a meeting to.
We have to have that agendized. That's not part of the discussion. Was the water, the
No,
fire map?
I think that's a stretch to say it's part of the fire
Okay,
hazard map.
and that's fine.
We can bring it back.
But yeah, okay. So
Well, wait a minute. What's the implications if your opinion isn't accurate on whether it's a stretch or not? Because I believe it is related to the purposes of the fire map, are fire hazard and fire risk, and the water system is one of the three key elements of that.
The recommendation is to discuss the development of the fire hazard map, not to make any recommendations stemming from the development of the fire hazard
Well,
map.
that's the recommendation. Okay, that's merely a guideline. So, once again, I think, in my opinion, the discussion of the fire water system relates to the fire hazard map, because this map copy that I have here has been marked up to reflect the fire hazard map as fire hazard risk in the community and in the sphere of influence currently, and that is based upon the availability of a reliable fire water system, which, to the best of my knowledge, we don't have. If the best representation, and once again, meaning no disrespect, it's an anecdotal representation of what Casitas is doing, what the status of the system is, what's going to be done. There's nothing that's come out in writing from any of the parties, any of the players. So at this point, as I've said at the last meeting and the meeting before that, and the December meeting with Ventura County Fire, we do not have, to the best of my knowledge, or to the best of anyone's ability to certify or otherwise ensure a reliable fire water delivery system.
Chair, Commander?
Yes.
Is it possible that the motion could be made as it relates to our fire map that we're now studying, that we present the recommendation? I mean, related to the discussion that we're having? Is that not possible? Because it does relate very much to the fire map. There are several issues that do.
I'd like to ask a different question
Okay.
of Mr. Vega. Where would it be proper to ask that we make a recommendation to council to interact with another agency for the benefit of giving the information we need somewhere so we can add it to our overlay, a GIS or something, so the city actually has the information. The information we have is from 2014 and before. And so we have no current information up to that time. So I guess my question is, as I look back over the last 8 years of trying to make recommendations that have not gotten to council one time, what is the format to make the recommendations?
So the best way to make recommendation is to have an agendized item with the recommendation directed to go to council, which we then would present to the mayor and city manager to place on a city council agenda. Alternatively, which another way I don't recommend as much would be, attend a council meeting and bring it up during public comment and see if council asks for it to be agendized. But I can't speak to what happened in the past, but to me, if we've been bringing these last couple of recommendations to council, and I think if we continue to do that, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be going to council.
Okay, well.
Okay, well, in that case, then I have a resolution, and that is that we recommend that the city adopt and implement a GIS system on its own, or in the event that Casitas has one, then adopts Casitas as part of the fire hazard map, since the layering of GIS covers water mains, hydrants, indicates flow rates, as incidentally it has other information related to fire hazard zones, high, medium, low, and historical fires and wildfire losses. So,
I don't have any issue with that recommendation. I would say I would advise you to put that on the next agenda and have it agendized, but it's your discretion.
I still don't understand the reason to have it agendized.
Just for Brown Act compliance, see.
Now, excuse me, Mr. Vega, I keep hearing you assert the Brown Act. I don't know whether you've read it all. I have.
I have as well.
And what we're just talking about here doesn't involve a Brown Act violation or a potential Brown Act violation, because making a recommendation for this item is just that. It's nothing more than a recommendation. It's a resolution to do that. And
I agree with you that the risk is very low. Anytime a board takes action, the item is supposed to be agendized.
Bob, okay, all right. At this point, then let's agendize it. Do you want any further clarification?
No, that's fine.
Okay, so that means I'll see it when it's in the draft agenda.
Can I
Okay.
say something else?
Yes.
There are several things that relate very directly to the fire map: the building codes, the hydrants, the fuel load, the road access. All of this relates to these fire maps. So if we can't discuss it and make a motion about it, then it kind of makes the discussion void.
Well, my understanding is those are criteria used to develop the fire map, which
But isn't that what we're doing?
I agree.
making the
I
fire
agree.
map?
But I think the recommendation to implement GIS,
I think that's a stretch.
yeah, personally, but like I said, it's, board's discretion, but
Let's just move on. I'm gonna go home.
Okay.
Well, there's a relationship at this point, I think it's rather evident, to recent public comments by at city council meetings relative to how productive the Building Appeals Board has been, and I think it's been fairly evident so far this meeting. Any productivity is curtailed by what I'd characterize as unreasonable constraint and restrictions that are, for the most part, seem to be operational. So, but we'll continue to attempt to produce some work product from this meeting, certainly, or certainly from this discussion item. Okay, I'm going to let my fellow members review this. This is a modification that the committee has come up with for the modifications to the most recent iteration of the
Pull your mic, never get home.
okay. These are modifications to the most recent iteration of the fire hazard map, which has been developed by Ventura County Fire Department. It's dated March 14, 2018, and the committee, Building Appeals Board Committee, has made some modifications to this map that reflect both fuel loads as well as the lack of a certified or reliable fire water system. So while, per Board Member Daddy's comments, the water purveyor for the Ojai Community Services District, Casitas Water District, is through their efforts making progress relative to an analysis and a determination from an engineering perspective of our fire water system at this point, pending any written, factual, public report. I would submit that this is an accurate depiction of our present conditions. So I'll let the two of you look at that, because what I'm going to submit is that we make a recommendation that the City Council review and adopt that map as an interim map pending our fire water system certification and fuel, a program of fuel reduction throughout the city, as well as some modifications to our building code.
You're making a recommendation as to what?
That the council review and adopt this fire map, this fire hazard risk map.
So we agree with that map.
Well, let's take a look at it, okay?
Well, I did.
So at this point, if you want to discuss it, if you want to.
Yeah, Bill, this is the first time I've seen this map, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's discuss it.
And I would like to recommend that, or reiterate, and please correct me. The city does not currently have its own fire map. We have a fire map from Ventura Fire, which also operates as CAL FIRE in this area of Southern California. And we're waiting for the CAL FIRE map. Now, we've waited for the CAL FIRE map since 2015, when we were supposed to have the last update. And they were really busy fighting fires, and they're busy fighting fires again. So while we're waiting for them to go ahead and complete their map, I would recommend that we at least have some type of a map. And when they get done with their map, it's easy enough to take a look at it and make modifications where it makes sense. Having no map of our own for the city just doesn't seem to be good governance.
Okay. Is that, so can we say that we will recommend this map as an interim until we get an updated one?
So you're going to recommend it even though you haven't looked at it?
I just looked at it. But I mean, I'm not an expert, I will agree with that. But I mean, like Bob said, it's better we have a map than no map. I mean, it looks like it's pretty well detailed.
It's just a recommendation. It's a place to start. We've never started.
Right.
If they take a look and say, we don't think that this area here deserves to be in a high hazard severity, let's at least have a place to start the discussion. We've never had a discussion. And I think you have to start somewhere. Even if we're wrong, we'll know soon enough if we're wrong.
Can I second the motion?
Well, let's discuss it a little bit further.
Oh, we can
Okay.
second it and then
So
discuss
let
it.
me make sure I understand this. We're recommending to the city council that they adopt this map.
It's an interim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't understand the map.
I've never seen the city council accept any recommendation in whole exactly as recommended without modifications and discussion. And I'm sure this will have a huge amount of discussion and a fair amount of modification. But we need to have a place to start, Tom. We've never started.
Questions? Judy?
What is 52 and 21 and 20?
Yeah, her question is, what is 22 and 52?
22 and 21 are the fire stations.
Okay. Station 21 and Station 22.
And 52?
And 52?
I believe that's one of the vehicles that's stationed there. Emergency response. Okay. That's across the way then.
Force.
It's across the street.
Okay.
Thank you.
And the.
It's not incorporated in the legend, so, you know.
Oh,
Is
right,
it-
what
is-
are these lighter red
The red,
lines indicating?
very high fire hazard.
This is all very high.
Mm-hmm.
Very high
Yes, it is.
severity.
So you're recommending that downtown is a high fire hazard?
Yes.
Well,
I think we should just take a look at those areas that were actually evacuated, Tom.
Well,
And those are the areas we declared safe, and we didn't declare the hospital safe. We didn't declare the convalescent center, which they marched 75 patients out with an awful lot of risk. And we had 50 plus units stationed on the street, and they were still moved. And we kept the gymnasium as the evacuation center, and then everything else got evacuated. So if you think that there's any part of this map that's incorrect, I would say the parts they didn't evacuate
yeah,
were the 2 golf courses.
yeah. Well, Bob, you know, there's no question that you and Bill didn't put a lot of work and effort into this. But my question is, why didn't we see this prior to tonight?
Well, this is when we have had this developed. Okay?
Why is this little area?
I will say, as Bob said, we couldn't have a serial meeting, so the materials could not be distributed to the rest of the committee. Sometimes when there's working committees, it'll come back. If people want to review it more, you can always, choose to continue it to the next meeting if you're not comfortable. But that's why it wasn't distributed in the meantime.
But one of the primary, several of the primary underlying analyses, the basis for the way the fire hazard map has been marked up, has to do with, once again, no certified reliable fire water system. Number two, a high degree of combustible fuel throughout the community. And number three, the actual structural elements in most of the construction in the community is not fire resistant. It's just the opposite. It's wood frame. It has exposed eaves. It has, most of the homes don't have fine mesh screens, vent screens. There's still a lot of Class C roofs.
I think one of the things that, people, and not you, Tom, but people tend to overreact when they look at this. We have a huge area of the city that is already in very high severity. We've got 262 units above Foothill Lane, and then we have some units below down on Country Club. The rates for every home in the city, at least with us, are the same, whether you're at the top of Foothill, you're in the middle of town, or you're at the bottom where Country Club Lane is. So it's not a matter of restricting, not allowing. It's really, as I see it, a tool for the city to be able to do some hardening and upgrading, and it will help us, I hope, get rid of Class C roofs, get rid of the large screens. We know now that we know that these ember showers have been devastating to these structures. It will allow us to come in with some codes that make sense. And I would say that this is a discussion. This is your first impression. This does not have to be adopted tonight. This isn't going to be adopted by us anyhow. This is simply a recommendation for the city to start. And here's a starting place.
An interim. And the other element that Board Member Daddy didn't reference is combustible fuels. If you look at the golf courses and then you look at the rest of the community, there's a tree canopy over the rest of the community where all of the structures exist. That's the combination of a tree canopy and combustible structures increases the level of risk.
May I make a comment?
Yes.
Our board, this board recommended on the January 16th meeting, recommended to the city council that the entire city and sphere of influence be designated a high and very high fire hazard severity zone because of building construction, the fuel load, and the availability of fire water. We recommended that after that long discussion with all the fire representatives that were here before. The meeting, yeah,
Well, the map reflects that,
right.
that determination. That's
That
all.
was after that meeting with
So-
all those fire representatives.
It's, you know, it's one thing to have a recommendation or a resolution or an understanding or an agreement. Now it's been implemented to the extent of a map's been marked up that reflects that.
So I have a question. Mr. Vega, are you okay with this map?
So, we haven't reviewed it yet. Staff hasn't received it. So we would need to review it. It would probably be similar to the last item where we took the BAB's recommendation and then made, staff recommendations in addition to that. And we include the full BAB recommendation so council could see that and then what council recommends.
So if I understand this right, and correct me, we're making a recommendation to the city council that they adopt this, right?
As an
Right.
interim map.
Without you reviewing it or three of the other members of this committee. Is that correct?
At this time, yes.
Okay, but that's correct.
May I add that it's an interim map because we're waiting for the other map to come from who? Does the other map come from?
CAL FIRE.
Okay, yes, it's an interim map. It's something to go on.
And I will note that when we took that last item to council, council directed staff to continue working with CAL FIRE to prepare the new map. So I don't have a time frame yet, but that's in progress.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't got any more questions.
Okay, so,
Are we going to take a vote on that?
yeah, was the motion seconded?
I would second it.
Okay. You want to take a vote
Yes,
then?
account, yes, Chair
Roll
Daddy.
call?
Member Daddy,
Yes.
Member Murphy,
Yes.
Member Farmer,
No.
Chair Ulrich,
Yes.
myself, yes.
Okay, motion carries. All right, is there any further discussion?
Tom, would you like to have some further discussion? I'd kind of like to know
Yeah, I would
why,
like to
if
know.
you don't mind.
I think you've heard what, no, my feeling is that there was a lot of work put into that map. And you're asking me to vote on something that I haven't even seen. Not to say that it's probably right on, but tonight's the first night that I saw this, okay? So I still stand by no.
Okay.
Mr. Vega, then, I'm really frustrated. I'm really ready to get up and go home. I feel that we have been constrained because we didn't put enough stuff in the agenda, or we didn't do this, or we didn't do that, or we didn't use the right process. It appears that we continually are being roadblocked by the process where we don't get in here and say, hey, everybody, let's get together and let's look at this map and let's talk about it and we'll do this and we'll do that, because we always have the Brown Act and special rules, and it appears that we're not able to act in the community's best interest because we've been discussing this since 2010 and we still haven't gotten a single thing since 2010. That's with... if we're going to do dark skies, we're going to do all this fun stuff, we have time. Fire season starts here in 3 more weeks. And we're just out of time. And it just seems that, the trip of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. And we're being hobbled where we can't take that first step. And so what I would ask is that for all future agendas, if you can come up with an agenda that is broad enough, that gives us enough latitude and flexibility and suggestions that allows us to actually do our job and get it to the council where they can do things to protect the people. And having thought about what Tom said, maybe somebody should have said, if it's allowed. I don't know what's allowed anymore. I mean, I've been coming to city council for a couple of decades, and now all of a sudden I'm finding out nothing works. I don't know if we couldn't have had that posted in the lobby for 2 or 3 weeks, so everybody in the city could walk in and take a look at it, and then when it finally goes to city council, everybody's looked at it, they've had their shot at it, they understand it, they write down all their questions, like what's number 52, right? And everybody has an equal shot at it. And so if you could help shape these agendas so we could just get the job done of getting Class A roofs and fire alarms in garages and things like that to protect the people. That's it. We're not trying to do anything else. And again, it gets frustrating. And I understand Tom's frustration because there was a ton of work. I spent dozens of hours with the best fire behavioralists that we have locally. And that's Doug Campbell. And he has done a huge amount of work. And he has a huge amount of stuff he can offer us. But it just seems that I can't call up Tom and I can't call up Judy and say, what do you think about that? Because now I'm violating the Brown Act. And so if you can figure out some way we need to do this, if we don't need to have meetings or we have a meeting and we have a non-agendized item that's going to be a general discussion so we can talk about it and figure out what we really need and then put it on the agenda for the next meeting. If that's the best way for us to move forward, please help us get there, because this is.
Well, I can tell you, so this was an attempt to streamline the process, but the risk when streamlining the process is it may result in not enough time. The best practice for something like this item would have been for the subcommittee to create the map and bring it back today for review, period. Then the next meeting would be agendize it for actual recommendation. I understood from the last meeting that the BAB was pretty much ready to take action reflecting that recommendation from January. So we wrote this in the way that would allow you to take action today. So there is a balance.
Would there have been a way from January when we made that to go ahead and post that map last month up somewhere, or is that still one of these things we don't get to do that?
We can release it as long as we release it to the entire public.
There was nothing secret about this.
I agree. That's an option moving forward.
Okay, well, please try to help us, but, guide us along with the procedures so we can do this, because we just need to get through it. We need to get the brush removed. I did send you that report from the fire. We've got available grants out there.
Mm-hmm.
And if you'll look at the website, what the website simply said was, this is what you need to do to protect your city. Remove the fuel, get defensible space, education. And I had to send that to Mr. Vega to send to you because I, by law, am prohibited from sharing information that I got publicly from the fire
but
department.
Once again, that's in the event there's a vote or action taken. Okay, you can. The Brown Act doesn't prescribe discussion of items that are not going to be acted upon or voted upon.
Okay, are we ready to move on to
Said
building
that,
codes?
Actually, excuse me, no, on this, I'm just looking at something. Having said that, then I'd like to make a request for 2 agenda items for the next meeting. And one is the Ojai City brush clearance plan, or the development of one in the event there isn't one does not exist. And 2 is the recommendation regarding the development recommendation regarding repair and upgrade to the firewater system to current minimum state requirements.
Along with the GIS item.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Then let's move to discussion item number 4. which is amendments to the City of Ojai Building Code, including fire-resistant construction. Recommendation is review the draft building code updates, make any needed revisions, and recommend adoption by the City Council. Any comments or from staff?
Through this, we've actually, from the last meeting, we included, just to be more productive, we've included all of the building code changes and not just limit it to the fire-related items, just so that we can get building code adoption complete. I mean, that is one of the tasks that we're at. So, as discussed in the last meeting, we just presented everything to you. Most of the fire items were added to the last section, to the last end of the table, in attachment A. And then I also included, in attachment B, another copy of the original, section, R 337.
Point one,
Well, it's the whole section, not just point
is
one.
that page 1 of 8?
1 of 8, yes.
Okay,
So,
in the back.
I've included in these items, we've included that there are such things as we modified, that in a local jurisdiction, it was only, this section only applied to very high fire severity zones. I've added to that to include high fire severity zones and moderate fire severity zones, so that the codes apply to that across the city.
Thank you very much, because while we're supposed to have 3, we've only had 1, and that wasn't ours. That was from the LRA. So thank you very much for that.
And this is just so that we don't have to go back and adopt and change the code once City Council does adopt a new map, which would then have variations between very high, and moderate.
We did get spark arresters in here, right?
Spark arresters are actually required.
Yeah.
What I did, for new construction. But what I did add was, if you're doing a re-roof, it would be required to install a spark arrestor.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, if it's a manufactured fireplace, it would just have to be per the manufacturer's recommendation.
That's CBC section 1511.3.
Correct.
Okay.
We also included Class A roofs only, removed all shake shingles, and let's see what else. And then we also required a complete re-roof on 10% or more of a repair to a Class A also.
Right, and obviously if there's, gets into a difference of opinion between yourself and a homeowner or a property owner regarding whether it's 10% or 9% or 11%, they can always appeal it to the building, your determination of the Building Appeals Board.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it involves expenditure of money that some people could, have a problem with. At a certain point. The next item, CBC 1803.1, which is the general geotechnical investigations, makes reference to 1803.2 and 1803.6, which they're not here, are they? So I can't see what that means.
I did not include those.
Okay, so what are the implications of the proposed Ojai language, where required by the building official or where geotechnical investigations involve in situ testing, lab testing, or engineering calculations, such a determination must be made by a California licensed engineer experienced in soils engineering. So where required by the building official?
Right. That would be if the
Any new construction?
there's a couple of things there. If the soils report comes back that it's required to have an engineer design the foundation,
Yeah, but doesn't the soils report have to be issued by a licensed California soils engineer?
A soils engineer, but it's not necessarily a structural engineer.
Well, it doesn't say that. It says requires the use of a California licensed engineer.
Correct.
And a civil engineer can do structural.
Correct.
And a soils engineer,
100%.
it depends on if there is an engineering, if they're a soils engineer, they can also do structural.
Yes, they
So-
can.
Okay, so what you're saying by this is what? Where
Is if
required
they-
by the building official is my concern.
Is if
That
if the
covered.
soil, if one soils engineer, if a soils engineer on a project says that an engineered
Structure?
structure is required, that doesn't necessarily mean that the structural engineer is going to be the same person. So that's all that's referencing.
Okay.
And
Right.
that would be also outside of construction. With this, the building official would require it outside of construction, outside of the tables within that section.
Okay, all right.
Tom, did we take care of acrylic skylights?
So acrylic skylights, the way we, as discussed in the last meeting, was the skylights have to be replaced if they don't meet the standards of the section.
Okay.
So we had a discussion on the best type of materials. There may be an acrylic material that meets that section, so I didn't want to eliminate
Well,
it.
no, and you've been doing a fantastic job. I really appreciate going over and above. Screening, we're going to do screening on raised foundations and screening on the eyebrows and the dormers, and we're going to find a way to stop these ember casts from burning the homes down from the up and down.
I do have one concern about changing the size of the openings, restricting the flow into the attic, because there is a minimum flow that is required on a re-roof. And on new additions and new and remodels and stuff and items like that, I have no problems requiring that. But on a re-roof, to change the flow pattern of the ventilation inside of the roof line may cause other problems. I need to talk to an engineer before I can back that.
Would then adopting the state standard we got to get away from it, 1/8 of an inch for now still work on a re-roof in some, or do you think that the 1/8 is also possibly restrictive?
Again, I would have to talk to
Okay.
an engineer, but I mean that I'm just being honest with my concerns on it, because we're restricting the flow in an attic, and it could cause other problems other than.
Let's just make sure we
Fire.
get it right, and if
Yeah.
we can, depending on what the engineer says, 1/16 is a lot safer than an 1/8.
100%.
But if they come in and, we've got to, go with reality. On section, at the very back, page 8 of 8,
I'm sorry.
and
You're in the original code?
I'm in California Residential Code Attachment B, 8 of 8, in building and planning. Talks about something that's hot on everybody's mind, accessory structures. Oh, boy. For accessory structures, mobile or not, prior to construction, they're going to need a permit, and they're going to need a checklist, and they're going to have to go through inspection prior to building, or can an inspection be done after one is constructed and put in that's not a certified manufacturer of modulars?
Can you be more specific on what
Yeah.
what element you're speaking? Are you
Well-
speaking of tiny homes?
Well, there can be ADUs as of July 1, and I hope Tom will back me up on this. As of July 1, the new HCD determination went from 220 square feet to 150 square feet to 120 square feet if it has 70 feet of living area. Is that correct? That's how that HCD is now changed?
That's
That
exactly
takes
how it's
effect July 1.
Yes.
I would recommend to the recommendations to the city council is if we're going to do it July 1, we may as well just do it now because it's 45 days away. And so when this thing goes, I don't know how soon they're going to adopt it, but if it's done and it's happening, then we may as well accept it now. I have no idea why they did a July 1. That's a weird one. But the July
I
1,
could actually answer that for you.
please.
Because that's mid-cycle for the building code. And so they do a beginning of cycle and a mid-cycle adoption of codes. And so it just gives them 2 opportunities during the year to make changes to the code.
Tom, I have a question. If I'm building a 200 square foot unit or a building or, shed, is the footings 27 inches now?
No,
It's not.
it's
Okay.
it's a for a prefab building, it would be, we would just issue a permit for greater than 120 square feet. For it would be the slab foundation would be per manufacturer's recommendations.
When does the 27 inch come into effect then?
We have eliminated the 27-inch footings.
Okay.
We're not going to recommend 27-inch footings.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a neighbor, I have somebody, a friend of mine's putting in a second unit, which is permitted and everything, and they're putting 27 inch.
So that might have been per an engineer's report also.
Are you talking
So
about embedment or width?
I'm talking
It's
about
embedment, right?
It's- yes.
Embedment, yeah, I'm not talking about width. The width would be, you could put a jet liner on top of it. I'm talking about depth.
depth, yeah. So again, that would go back to the engineer's
Okay,
report.
so if it's expansive soil or whatever, they might require that.
Ventura County is known for expansive soils. So again, that would go back to the engineer's report.
Okay.
I mean, right now, we're just doing minimum building code, where we would allow it as a minimum building code,
Which is 12 inches.
which is 12 inches for a single-story family, single-story, single-family residence.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay.
And did we discuss the adoption of, since we adopted all of the Ventura codes except for 2-story, you don't have to have design review in Ventura for 2-story, you do here in Ojai. But what they have in Ventura is they have a 160 square foot for a tool shed, a tough shed, without electricity, without water. Those require permits. No permit required. What is the detriment or extra hazard by moving from 120 to 160? I mean, now you can make ADUs down to 120.
I have not seen that Ventura County guidelines or code section. The only detriment to it would be you would be implementing a lesser value than the building code.
But it would have no safety issue. It would have to have the
I
same
would-
setback if applicable.
I
It
would have to
the same
look at
condition.
I would have to see how it was written by Ventura County to see if I would be able to recommend that.
Okay, I would like us to look at that because, again, we took everything except their second story. So, and that was, I believe, the 1985 adoption. So if we can do that, then that would be fine. And then for these non-permitted, I'm going to call them tool sheds, they're exempt from permit as long as they stand at 24 volts and don't have water, correct?
Yes, you're allowed to have low voltage Okay, it took me a second there. You had to have you're allowed to add low voltage. There's no permit required for low voltage lighting, electricity, anything like
But there is for water.
that. There is for water, yes.
And then if we have water, it requires a permit.
Correct.
Then there is a PA required. Is that correct?
I do believe so, yes, now.
Okay, I just want to make sure we go right down to Yellow Brick Road with
Yes,
this.
sir.
Okay.
A
I didn't hear your last question. There was,
If you add water to something that is exempt from a permit, 120, you can put in a 120 square foot tough shed. If you add water to it, you need a permit. Then you're going to have to get a PA because you're going to put the water underground. Okay, so if you're going to add water, you may as well add electricity.
Right.
And the electricity does not necessarily need a PA. You can still go on an overhead structure, is that correct, for power? You can go directly off the point of your home,
It,
directly onto the point of a shed, or
There-
does that have to be underground?
it depends on how it would be connected, and there's several. You know, it'd have to be per the building code, so we'd have to look at and how it was strung up and that kind of stuff, the span that it would run. So there's a couple of factors that would be applied there.
Okay.
On the PA question, if it's documented previously disturbed, you would not need a PA. If there's already been piping or conduit or anything in that area.
so pre-existing then.
Documented pre-existing.
Does that mean under streets?
I think they're working through that. Yeah, I think it depends on the depth for something like that.
Well, where you have known utility depths?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Okay.
Stuff keeps coming up.
All right.
Wayne, you got Wayne.
Excuse me. Oh,
Tom, anything else that you've changed that we've been trying to get? Did we come up with any way to put fire alarms in garages? I lost that unit, 3 months ago now?
it's here.
The people were totally unaware. They didn't know.
It's in here.
And everything happens in this town by coincidence. Coincidentally, we paved the street. Coincidentally, it was dark. Coincidentally, we didn't have the fire hydrant markers in the street. I mean, it was one of these kind of perfect things where it's really ripping. So,
I included a section. It's actually the last part of the table in the packet. It's heat sensor detectors. If you would like, it's real short. If you'd like me to read through it for you.
yes, please,
Sure.
please.
So it says general heat sensor. Heat sensor shall comply with section 314.9. And then the listing. Heat sensor detectors shall be listed in accordance with UL 521. And then where required, heat sensor detectors shall be installed within attached and unattached garages when a permit is issued with a valuation greater than $500. Power source. And it says heat sensor detectors shall be either hardwired or plugged into an outlet receiving power from a commercial source and shall be equipped with a battery backup. Heat sensor detectors shall emit a signal when the batteries are low.
Fantastic.
All right.
Thank you very,
So-
very much.
There was a couple other things that were brought up in the last meeting. It was how do we implement, so in this, I talked about the $500 valuation. I'm just going to give you some information. It's fine if we leave it at $500. It's typical for smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors to be installed at valuation greater than $1,000. If you want to just be consistent, it's fine. We can leave it at $500 if you would like. I'm just throwing that out there just for consistency.
I think that's fantastic. Can you also do that at point of sale?
The
Transfer?
point of sale transfer, since that's not related to building code, that would have to be written into the municipal code as part of the ordinance.
what would we have to do to make a recommendation that that happen?
No, it was noted in the last one. So right now, we're just going, just like we did with the BAB items, with the BAB procedures. We brought you this, and then we would bring you an ordinance at the next meeting, and in which would have items like that.
Great, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Also, what about for tenants, landlords and tenants? I mean, is there some way we can get that word out there or make it happen when a tenant, they should all have fire alarms in their garages?
That's actually required by, that's required by the building code well, not fire alarms, but the heat sensor. So that would, so when a new tenant moves in, that would be up to the property owner to make sure that it's installed per the municipal code. Is that what you're asking?
That is what I'm asking,
Okay.
but I
There's no way for
I don't
like the
think
building department to verify it because there's no permit issued.
I see.
I honestly think that this would be, I mean, and I just want to clarify something with you in a second, is I honestly think, based on the permits that we issue here, this will be caught up throughout the city very, very quickly,
Okay.
because either it's going to be a sale, or are we sticking with 500, or are we going to go to 1,000?
No, 500 is
Okay.
fine. That's a water heater. If they're gonna go do a water heater, we gotta have a permit. We're gonna have somebody there.
Okay.
And
I just
it
wanted to be
needs-
sure.
It needs to be, the options here about whether the heat sensor shall be either hardwired or plugged into an outlet. In order for a heat sensor to be effective, it has to be, have to be an outlet on the ceiling or somewhere above the door height.
That would typically,
Manufacturer's recommendations.
that would be
They're only
typically
effective then.
be installed per manufacturer recommendation, and that's just standard.
Right. So, but having said that, a plug-in heat sensor that measures 135 degree, what's called heat rise, above 135 degrees, costs Amazon $17, $20 if you want a different name brand, but and I could say that from the perspective of I'm doing that myself. I just purchased one. I'm see what my from this perspective, it's fairly easy to do to comply with this. It would be better to be hardwired, and that might involve an electrical permit and an electrician, but it's not an expensive permit or an exercise for an electrician to do a cut-in box and provide an outlet adjacent to, say, the garage door operator or anything that's up high where there's wire that can feed it, if someone chose to do either a plug-in or a hard wire. So this isn't an egregious expense, but it's certainly life and safety prevention of injury or death, as well as, to a certain extent, mitigating structural damage.
And the only fatality we've had in a structure was in the garage when there was a fire. And we haven't had a fatality 50 years in a home. So thank you very much. I mean, you know what? Excellent, excellent, excellent work. We have been waiting for these types of,
I want to commend you on your work, Tom. Great job.
Yes.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Great job.
Do you have a speaker?
Yes, I'd like to ask Mr. Maynard to step up and address us on agenda item number 4.
Thank you very much. Wayne Maynard, resident 609 Gurley Road. And a couple of comments on some issues. But first of all, since we're talking the heat detectors, and believe it or not, I don't really agree with what you guys are doing on that.
No, okay.
Yeah. First of all, you have to ask yourself, what is the purpose of the heat detector? Is it to help save lives for people in the building, or is it to save property protection? And.
I don't see where there's an or. I think there can be an and.
Okay, or
I
and.
think an and's okay.
So if I have a heat detector in my garage, and you're not requiring it be interconnected with the smoke detectors in my house, and I'm sitting in my living room watching TV, and I get a fire in the garage and the heat detector goes off, who's gonna hear it?
Is your speaker on?
I don't know. Okay, so it's like, it doesn't make sense to me that it doesn't really gonna work, okay? There's nobody else doing it. It's not in it's not in the building code. I think it's kind of a waste of money. The idea of plugging it into an outlet where somebody can just come unplug it and stick something else in the plug, that doesn't make sense to me. Most of the time when you have a requirement for a fire protection system or fire detection system, there's requirements for what standard you install it to. You're identifying a UL listing for the detector itself, but there's no standard referenced in your code as to what you install it to. So that means the city's now kind of taking on liability because we're not referencing a specific installation standard. For example, how many detectors would you put in a 4-car garage versus a 1-car garage? What's the spacing between the detectors? All of those type of things need to be evaluated when you have a requirement for a fire protection system. And you just kind of go out and on a limb doing this, and it's not really, I don't think it's really a complete proposal, and I think it's kind of a waste of money. So I would suggest just dropping the whole thing with the heat detector in the garage. If you really want to provide protection for people, you know what my recommendation is for that,
Yeah, we know.
is to put fire sprinklers in. So the next issue is with regards to the Class A roof requirement. I think that's probably good. I'm just thinking now that we have a fire map and we've defined different levels of fire severity in the community. Maybe Class A might be too restrictive. Maybe in certain areas, Class B might be okay. I don't know if you guys really know what the difference is between a Class A and a Class B roof and what the testing
A
standards
Class
are.
A roof is 2 fire bricks that'll hold off a fire for 2 hours, and a Class C, which is the code today, is the weight of a nickel for 15 minutes. And
Right, they do a firebrand test, and
Right.
they burn the fire on the roof and all that, yeah. So, I don't, I have a concern that if somebody has a tree limb fall into their home, and they put a roof on 5 or 10 years ago, and now they have to repair that small area that it's gonna trigger them tearing off a perfectly good roof and replacing it with a new Class A roof. It seems like potentially high
and again,
expense
Mr.
also.
Maynard, that's paid for by the insurance company, because anytime you have a mandatory code upgrade, that's an item that's in the homeowner's policy. It's been there since the Malibu fire.
Oh,
That
that's
says
good.
if
I wasn't aware of that. I
if-
thought you
if
had to
it's-
buy that as
and
a-
I go,
as
and
an
that's why we
add-on.
need to discuss these more. It's a code upgrade, and so if it's required, and it's over 10%, and it's due to a casualty loss, not just an old roof, I had an 18-foot in diameter tree fall on a house a month ago on Upper Montgomery, and we had to put a Class A on it, which was fine. We spent the money, and it's fine.
Oh, good.
Insurance
I
will
wasn't aware of
gladly
that.
spend the money for the upgrade. So it's not going to come out of anybody's pocket, except for the insurance companies. So,
That's good, yeah, good to know.
well, we want to keep, look, we're trying to save our own money, and we're trying to harden the community too. And we feel preventive money is well spent. Okay, so I'm sorry for the interruption.
No problem. This just was a concern I had with regards to the roofing requirement. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Can I ask Mr. Maynard? Wayne, so back to the, I call them fire alarms, but.
The heat detector,
Heat detector.
rate of rise or fixed temperature.
So are you saying that we should add something to that, like a certain standard, to meet a certain standard of fire alarm or heat
Well,
detector?
if you're going to pursue it, if you're going to pursue it, I would recommend that you evaluate potentially some NFPA standards for heat alarm systems or heat detectors.
So we use
I
the
don't know.
best,
I haven't
The
studied
highest
that.
standard. And then, are you saying if you're watching TV in another part of the house, you're not going to hear it?
I don't think so.
Wow.
Well, deaf people aren't going, people hard of hearing aren't going to hear it anyway, so I don't know what we do about that.
Right. The smoke detectors, which have been in the code for a long time,
Right.
are now required to be interconnected. So if one goes off, they all go off, and it makes a lot of noise in the living area where you're at.
Right.
But if you have a detached garage or attached garage that's at the other end of the house, I don't think you're going to hear it.
But we're not eliminating the smoke detectors either.
I understand.
yeah, you know, we'll have that. And, I mean, it's just an extra protection to have the heat detector in the garage. And if there's more than 2 cars, maybe we need to have more than 2 heat detectors. I mean, I think that does need to be considered as to what we recommend.
Well, and you know what? They can go ahead and sprinkler the garage, and they can go ahead and have it hardwired.
Well,
We're
yeah.
not saying that we're going to prevent them
No.
from going overboard. We had a fire on Carrillo 3 months ago,
Yeah.
and the people in the home were totally unaware that the garage was totally enveloped, the cars were totally enveloped.
Yep.
And when we get down to cost, and we start talking about, you got 4 or 5 of these things in a house, $75 a piece, they're interconnected, you got a $300, $400, $500 electrician bill, they're not gonna do it. You got a $20 charge, and it's easy to put in, it makes it affordable, it's safe, and half the people that live in town are in rented units.
Well, I guess the other thing I just remembered, that I actually looked it up yesterday. The 2013 NFPA reports 140-page document on fires in residence, and only 2% of the fires begin in garages in residence. So, and 1%.
That's hard to believe.
Yeah, 1% of the fatalities were from fires that started in garages.
Right.
So it's a very low risk. Most fires start in the kitchen, cooking area, living room, the areas that people are at. So,
Okay.
thank
Right,
you.
no occupancy generally in the garage, and that's why.
Yeah,
That's why there's no risk, because people aren't there to do dumb things
right.
most of the time.
Well, I'd like to point out a couple of things, so 3 things. In this era of unaffordable housing, there's a lot of folks who are living in garages.
That's true.
Whether it's legal, permitted, or otherwise, it's just a fact of life, I believe, number 1. Number 2, smoke detectors, I can remember when they first came out, and they were all plug-in. And then the evolution of the fire code rendered them hardwired and interconnected, and that's where we're at now. Excuse me? With a 10-year battery backup. Yeah, each iteration gets more specific, and now we're looking at presently, and the newest development is carbon monoxide detectors and alarms, which have to have the same thing, a 10-year lithium battery. The issue with them is almost all of them are plug-in. You can get them hardwired, but almost all the ones that are commercially available. And those, in order to be effective, a lot of people don't realize it, they need to be low because gas gets down low, it's heavier than air. They can be disconnected, of course. The initial smoke detector alarms were also battery powered and easily unplugged, or and even so, the same thing with the battery backup, depending on the hardwired units, depending upon someone's tolerance for a chirpy bird in their environment, people will just let that go as well without the battery backup. So, I mean, the layers of safety always begin with something that is not effective for everyone in all cases. It's not applicable in all situations, but it's a start. And any, as was referenced I referenced at the beginning of this meeting, any effort is better than no effort. That's how a vision begins and is implemented. So, okay.
Question?
Yes.
Tom, does the fact that we are eliminating all wood shingles indicate that there is no shingle or shake that is treated to a standard of Class A?
That's what we've recommended in here. Just no new, the way this is written, no new shingles or shakes would be permitted to be installed.
Are you saying that they can't be treated to a standard Class A level?
There is a process in that chapter, but it was brought up in the last meeting that there should be no treatment on that wood.
There's two issues, Judy. One is it makes them very expensive, and then people rely on that. And then the other issue, which is something that's not addressed too often, is with time and weathering, they lose that
Protective.
fire-resistant protection. And then the homeowner may have, or property owner may have no awareness of that and not know what the cost of the of reapplication is, or reapply something else as a weathering prevention, a sealer, a stain, what have you, that countervails the effect of the fire treatment, the retardant, and then, or in the event they are aware of it, they wind up finding out how much it costs to get it retreated, and they don't do it anyway. So the issue is, it becomes, with time, the passage of time and the change in ownership of property, just a continuation of a fire
problem.
hazard.
Okay.
And I think R33.4.3, which says fire retardant treated shingles and
We
shakes
haven't addressed that.
listed by the state fire marshal as Class B, and since we're no longer doing anything other than A, it would be eliminated under that section 3.
Can you repeat that?
13 of 15, page 13 of 15, 337.4.3, when it goes to number 3, it says building code and listed by state fire marshal for use as Class B roof shall be accepted, but we're not allowing any more Class B roof. So the fire retardant, it doesn't appear that it would be.
The title of that section is fire retardant treated wood shingles and shakes, and so we've just deleted that entire section because of that.
And also, you need to remember that this is for new construction for the most part. In the event of an addition or remodel, it has to be applied. There becomes a question of to what extent and in what conditions, and that would be a determination by the building official, which is, of course, once again, subject to appeal to the Building Appeals Board in the event someone disagreed with it.
Tom, is the department now actually issuing code upgrade letters when we see trees fall on a roof and things like that? We went through years where there wasn't any code upgrades that would say, hey, you got to change this, you got to change this. We would do certain things. I know you have limits. But I would see people with a tree on their roof up Foothill, and they'd have 2-wire electric non-grounded. And we would go ahead and issue them a site because they didn't get a permit for the upgrade in dual glazed windows. And we're leaving bare wires hanging between the house and the garage. It just, I don't know where you folks can enforce, but if it's for health and safety and especially for fire, I would hope that you guys would do the right thing.
Like you said, we are limited to the to what we can force somebody to do. If they touch it, it has to be upgraded to current standards. If it is a life and safety issue, then we can get them to update it to current standards. But if it's just something that we observe and it's not a safety issue, then we can't necessarily force them to upgrade it. Also, we have to be careful on when we go out to a property and to investigate a tree falling, to limit what we investigate to the area that is damaged. That's the responsibility of the building inspector, the building official. Everybody has their own privacy at that time too. So if it's something that we could see from the public right away, that's a clear and imminent danger, then it's something that we can act on.
So what you're saying is that when you go out for a specific reason, you're not out there to look at other things that may not be conforming, right? or
It's
unle-
not a fishing expedition.
Yeah, unless it stands out and causes, like, there's cause for concern, then no.
okay.
But if there is a concern, then we would address it by issuing either, if they're doing work that without a permit, that's one thing. But if there's something there that's a safety hazard, then we would address it and ask them to fix it, and then take the proper action after that.
Okay.
Okay. The next section of this has to do with fire-resistant construction. Is anybody,
Did we get through all the code changes? Every
we
one
got
of
through
them?
these on that. Then we have the materials and construction methods for exterior wildfire exposure.
So that section, attachment B, that was just reference that was handed out in the last meeting. And so I just gave that as reference so you could see where I was pulling that information from in the building code.
Okay, so, all right, so, anybody have any further questions or comments?
Do we need to take any action?
Yes, we do. The recommendation is review the draft building code updates, make any needed revisions, and recommend adoption by the city council. I would submit that we're at the point where we need to make a recommendation for adoption by the city council to these revisions.
Is that a motion?
No,
that-
he can't.
Excuse me?
He doesn't make the motions. One of us will.
Well, actually, I'll just leave it at that. I will make the motion.
All right.
I second it.
He
Okay.
can't.
Okay?
Would you make the motion, and then I'll second
I'll move it. We adopt these recommendations.
it. I second that.
Okay, we have a roll call, please.
Yes. Member Daddy?
Yes.
Member Murphy?
Yes.
Member Farmer?
Yes.
Chair Ulrich?
Yes.
And myself, yes.
Okay. All right, item number 5, let's see here. This is the draft ordinance modifying Chapter 1 of Title 9 of Ojai Municipal Code related to the Building Appeals Board. This is a recommendation from staff is review the draft ordinance modifying Chapter 1 of Title 9 of Ojai Municipal Code related to the Building Appeals Board and make any necessary changes and recommend adoption by the City Council. I'm going to describe the discussion first, and then we can take public comment. The discussion is described as, at the April 11, 2018 Building Appeals Board meeting, the Building Appeals Board requested changes be made to Chapter 1 of Title 9 of the Ojai Municipal Code related to the Building Appeals Board. Because the change would modify the Ojai Municipal Code, staff has prepared a draft ordinance, which is included herein. Changes include a reduction of fee for an appeal before the Building Appeals Board from $500 to $100 for an appeal. Extend the time for appeal by residents from 10 days to 15 business days. Reducing the time for the city's scheduling of the appeal from 45 days to 15 business days. And stating that an untimely response by the city results in waiver of the city's right to the appeal. City staff has no issue with the changes to timelines for the appeal. However, staff does have concerns about an untimely response resulting in a waiver of the city's right of appeal, as it is foreseeable that a possible health and/or safety issue could be allowed. Staff suggests incorporating language that would guard against a health and/or safety issue. Okay. Would you like to comment, Mr. Maynard?
Wayne Maynard, 609 Gridley Road in Ojai. And generally, I'm in opposition to this proposed ordinance and the changes it's going to make. It comes across to me as a method to kind of reduce the building official's authority and make it easier to file an appeal. And Me as a taxpayer and the community, I'm not real interested in, because I know it's going to be more than $100 for staff time and put everything together for an appeal. And for people just to disregard what the building official's opinion is, I'm just going to take it to this group of people up here and have them hear my case and make a decision. I don't think that's the right way to do business. I think you need to, encourage the people to work out their differences with the building official, because the building official knows the codes and the standards and the requirements and has enough education and experience where they can review alternate methods. You can't waive a requirement, but you can't accept an alternate method or a different process. And that's what the building official's training and education is about, okay? If, my opinion, the purpose of the appeals board is that if for whatever reason the appellant feels that the building official is not using good judgment in their decision on either approving or denying an alternate method, then they can come and bring it to the appeals board, and the appeals board will review that building official's judgment. So it seems to me that that's what this is doing. And so, and I'm not even sure it's that you can legally just waive a building code requirement. It's a state building code, and if some time frame isn't met, it seems like it's not really legal to just waive a building code requirement because the time frame wasn't met. So I'm in opposition to it.
Thank you. Okay, open for discussion then.
Mr. Vega, suggestion. As the state, not us, as the state of California put this thing together, they put certain things in, and they're the one that proposed this. And what they proposed was what I see as something that's a little off balanced, is the city has 45 days to respond. And if they don't respond, it goes without a limit. They just never respond. There's no penalty. The only recourse is court. If the appellant doesn't respond within 10 days, they lose, and the city takes whatever action. Kind of like blowing up this little house around the corner here that neither one of you got to see. The nice little yellow house, that's where the dirt is over here. And so that's what happens there. There, as I said the last time, there seems to be a lack of fairness where the city has an unlimited amount of time to do nothing while the appellant waits. And the burden is totally on the appellant, and I think that's why the state wrote this. Do you have an alternate suggestion? And would you have an example of a safety issue? I think that a safety issue would be something that would be imperative. And if you need language that says, hey, it's 10 days unless the town is on fire, or there has been a declaration of emergency, which automatically adds 2 more weeks, or something that's reasonable. I'm not here to blow up or burn down the city. I'm here to say that if the appellant's got 10 days and the city never has to come to the table, ever, because at 45 days, when you miss that 45-day date, you never have to show up. And the people have got their $500, you never give it back, and you never show up. I don't get that. And I would look, could I have Mr. Vega answer my question first? I would look for an alternative, because I just don't think that's representative of the people.
So a couple of points. One point is when looking at the code and looking at the other appeals sections, such as planning commission appeals, the language is very similar to this, and the only difference is, I believe the timeline is, instead of scheduling the appeal from 45 days, it has to be scheduled within 30 days, but it's still written the same way. And then looking at other cities' planning commissions, other cities I looked at don't have a building appeals board, so I looked at other city planning commissions, and they are also written the same way. And I think the reason for that is because you don't want to be in a position where you are allowing by error something to occur that could be a health and safety issue. So I think the extending the timeline for the residents, I don't see an issue with. Reducing the time that we state that the city shall schedule the appeal, I don't see an issue. But I've never seen a planning or building code written to say if you miss that deadline, it's automatically the city loses its right to appeal, or the right to.
Okay,
hold it.
then what would be a reasonable time for a competent city to respond? And if it's 60 days, then let's adopt 60 days. But don't adopt never. And what we have today is never. And I just think never is egregious.
Well, and I attended at least 2 meetings where designers, developers, contractors were meeting with at the time, the interim CDD director and the city manager, at least on one instance, and several individuals responded to the availability of a building appeals board appeal as an option to clarify or perhaps overturn a contest. I think is probably the best and most accurate term. Contest a determination made by the building official, which is state law, after all. The reason for a building appeals board or a city council acting as a building appeals board has been to respond to the capacity of the building official, notwithstanding their intent, their knowledge, their experience, to make decisions that have a deleterious effect on a property owner's use and enjoyment and improvement of their property with no recourse besides the courts. As such, the state legislature thought it was important enough to create and enable this legislation that created Building Appeal Board. And so as such, what we're trying to here is determine how to best to make it into a process that does not subvert itself by an unduly long period to even schedule the appeal. People who consider time as money, people who have their house or their property in a partial state of construction don't have 45 days plus to get a determination clarified, a determination by the building official clarified. So we're trying to make this so it can happen a little bit quicker, and I still haven't heard any other options that would either induce the city to schedule something sooner rather than later. I understand the concept of how significant it is resulting in a waiver. I don't think that's necessary to do, but I still haven't heard anybody come up with an option.
Can we hear from a speaker? We have a speaker.
Okay.
I think the option is political. If the city staff is not responding to the requirements that the city has in their ordinance, whether it's 15 days or 45 days, if they don't meet that deadline, then it becomes political. You go to your council person, you complain, and they try to get the thing rolling. That's the way I would see it.
Yeah, well, I would say that still, when you're in the middle of a project and you're held up indefinitely,
Oh, yeah.
they don't really
yeah.
care. We've been through that with too many projects here in town. Let's take a look at Mallory Way. We already know what performa is in this community. And so I agree with the legislature writing this thing as a way to have your appeal heard. And I also agree with the fact that the city council can't overturn it. I mean, the state added protection to the individual city and took it away, to the individual resident and took it away from the city. And I'm just saying that they didn't do enough of it because they never have to respond. And then legal action is the only way, and that's what happened on Mallory Way. When the city never responded, there was action against the city. And I just think that's a poor way to run the city.
If you want to propose reducing the time for the city scheduling of the appeal from 45 days to 15 business days, and then if it becomes a hardship, it becomes a circumstance that requires additional staff resources or something that's not practicable to schedule within 15 days, then in order for the city to avoid a waiver of the city's right to appeal, how about then the city would have to assert that is in fact an issue of health and or safety. Most of the building code applies to, was developed with notions of health and safety.
It all applies to
Yeah,
health
pretty
and safety.
much.
Title
It's not
IX
just-
all applies to
Right.
health and safety.
So it's any determination by the building official that asserts any portion of the building code is going to be ostensibly a health and safety issue.
Well, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're clear. Most appeals would be in before a project even started. So it's before a permit is issued. I just wanted to make that clear. It's not going to be in the middle of a project where they're waiting. I just want to. There may be a determination in which they may be in the middle in which they did a revision or something and they disagreed with the building official. That would be the other.
The other one is where we have somebody doing a commercial project that comes before planning, and they get red tagged 5 times, right, Kathy? And they're doing projects and they're making changes on their own before they're submitting plans. I get that, and I understand that we are going to always have those type of people. But again, I think the 45 days with the city never has to respond. If you think that if we can have a health and safety issue that's so egregious and you need a 45-day, I hate to go back there. I think we really need to move it up real quick so they can move along. And if you need more time for default where the city loses their right to an appeal, nobody wants to have a huge issue. But I would say this, I think there are no things that are so big that they can't be handled in this time frame. Even although neither one of you had the pleasure of being here, Mr. Maynard, you certainly did. Even when it came to the cell tower going into people's backyard, there was a way to move it along quickly, and the city, in fact, ended up having the individuals go ahead and write the language that we needed to protect the neighborhood. City didn't do it. The community did it. And I just see this as a community involvement. If there's no other reason, again, no one can waive health and safety codes, period. So
I do have a couple of alternatives.
would love to hear them.
So let's say 30 days. That's placeholder for whatever we end up doing. Within 30 days of receiving an appeal, the building official shall schedule and hold a hearing before the building appeals board, which shall consider relevant evidence presented at the hearing, period. This deadline shall only be extended upon showing of good cause by the city. That could be one way to kind of firm it up. Another option, within 30 days of receiving an appeal, the building official shall schedule and hold a hearing before the building appeals board, et cetera. If a hearing is not scheduled before the building appeals board, the applicant will receive a refund of their payment. So there's a couple of other options besides just going straight to waiver.
It's going to make me go crazy. What are days?
Well, we've already kind of discussed that. What the BAB recommended was 15 business days.
And you're, when, okay, and when,
And so now if you're saying 30 business days, that gets us up past 45.
Which is why I said that's just placeholder while I was
So we've
reading.
started exactly where we, so we
I would
ended
not
where we
recommend
started.
15, but it's your decision. So for me, I would recommend 30 business days.
no can do. But I'd say, you know, I'm, yeah,
See, 30 business
I'm-
days is over 45 days. Yeah, 45.
excuse me?
So we're words off. Started.
15 business days is still 3 weeks. You know, you want to increase that to 20 business days?
No.
No, okay. You want to, I'm okay with deleting the waiver of the city's right to appeal. You know, I think there are considerations here that, that do relate to the practical element of staff load as well as health and safety issues that I don't think, I also don't think that council's going to approve anything that waives the city's rights. So I'd say let's just get rid of that one.
That's just a be responsible clause.
No, I got it, but I think that everything else that's proposed in here in the draft ordinance is responsible.
I would say we're only a we're
Yeah.
only a recommending body.
Yeah,
Give it to them and then let them work out the fine tune. Maybe they want the 20. I don't know what they want, but we've been at this since 2010. Let's get them something they can work with. They're going to make all the rules. They can ask some questions. We can come back. We've got great staff. This has been a pleasure. This second half after the fire map has been a pleasure. Looking at seeing these things that came in, because they're really going to help protect this community a lot. I think they're very reasonable. I really appreciate both of your efforts very, very much. Thank you.
so what you're saying is just adopted as drafted? All right. In that case then, do we have a motion and a second?
Yeah, I move that we accept it, presented.
Okay, roll call?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Unless there's anything else?
Yes, there is. Next meeting. How are we going to do the agenda for next meeting?
Well, we've got 3 items already. Okay?
I want to make sure the language is expansive enough
All right.
where we're not censured.
And
We have
also
to
will
bring that item to the following
Is there
meeting.
any reports or comments from either
Yes,
council
we have our council.
or
Just thank you for an
the planning?
interesting meeting. I always learn a lot, thank you.
You're quite welcome. And since there's 2 members of the planning commission, nobody wants to? Okay. Was that a no-look point?
We're both here, but I'm the one who had to be here tonight, or well, was assigned. Yeah, we haven't really had any projects coming through, but I wanted to say that we recently were working on water conservation, and we have a list of future discussion items, and fire happens to be one of them. So how it relates to zoning. And I'm sure we'll probably get into like defensible space and all that kind of fun stuff. So I just wanted to share that.
And I would have a request, as I'm going a little crazy when I watch some meetings, and Mr. Vega, you can certainly help, and Tom, you can certainly help. I continually see zoning and land use turn into 1.5 gallon flushable toilets and a number of Title IX component stuff.
We're
I
always-
would really urge Planning Commission, if they could get a laundry list this week, we could have added the laundry list now. And we
Basically,
could have
that-
had that.
We actually did request that of our planning director, our community development director, to basically kind of itemize out, and we were very clear that some of the items did need to go to the Building Appeals Board. So I'm not sure when you're going to get that, but we did make that request.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Ulrich, I just want to make sure that we have the items for the 3 items. So we're going to talk about the Ojai City Brush Clearance Plan, correct? Recommendations to the water system, citywide, and then also the GIS system. Is there any other items?
Yeah, on the water system, Tom, is there a, as far as gallons per minute, is there a minimum on that? On the hydrants, I'm just curious.
Yeah, there is. We've got 25 gallons a minute on one of them, and they need 550.
We gotta include this. And then you also wanted the GIS, the fire GIS, correct? So it's gonna be those four items.
That's the water system.
The
GIS.
water system.
They're
yes.
one and the same, but let's make it clear to the public that at a minimum.
But earlier in the day, earlier in the meeting, we were talking about the Ventura County fire. Was that related to the water system? I may have misunderstood.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to add my 2 cents. The purveyor is Casitas. Casitas is responsible for delivering. Fire department is not responsible for delivering water at all.
Yeah, I'm aware of
Casitas.
that. I must have misheard.
And I think Casitas, what I wanted to make that resolution is that we asked Casitas for their engineering report, and we asked them if we can take their GIS and not start over and just incorporate it and just take it and put it in our system. And I know this is for planning commission, not for us, but it would be great if we went to the sanitary district and we got their system and we could incorporate all of the utilities along with the other service community facilities, and we have that program here, and we would allocate somebody to finish it so we'd know what in the world's under the street. I mean, that would...
And that includes gas lines.
Yeah.
And that would also include gas and petroleum pipelines that come through the city. I mean, basically considerations from a health and safety perspective. And my reference to the fire department relative to the water was that the water purveyor have a standard that is, for the fire system, is compliant with the state fire marshal and the state fire code. And they have very specific pressure and flow requirements for an approved system. It's that system when you build a new one, and I'm sure there's some allowances made for older systems based on, the diameters and some other things were engineered differently back in the day. But at this point, we have no sense of anything. And we have been, at least several of us have been asking this question for years. And we really have no sense of anything. At this point, we need to get some kind of written certification or confirmation of condition, system condition.
Jim, will this map be made available for the public prior to the council seeing it? Can it be put in the fire map?
Yeah, we can think of some ways to make it available to the public.
Yeah, I'm just thinking if somebody wants to come to the city council and, look at it, and
Yeah.
have questions about it.
Yeah.
Well,
I was thinking we could put it online. We can probably put some, unfortunately, it might not scale down great, but we could put some
Yeah.
handouts and things.
Maybe, Bob, maybe you can put it in the newspaper, huh?
Chair,
this is going to take a little bit of there's another copy in here that can be rendered a little more presentable for publication, dissemination, and public review. So perhaps what I need to do is render the one map, the fresh copy, in something that's acceptable visually. Because otherwise it looks like it was hand done, because it was. So I'll get something that looks a little more sharp.
Chair.
Yeah, I'm just following up on Bob's recommendation when, there should be.
Let everybody see it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Matter of fact, it doesn't necessarily have to go to the next council meeting. It can, be published or presented out for at least a couple of weeks.
Chair, can I also
Yes.
recommend one more thing?
You mean for
Just-
the agenda?
For the
Or-
agenda, yeah. Just to stay on topic and to continue with the progression of the items that council has set aside for us to do, can I recommend that I present 1 or 2 chapters of Title IX so that we can do the complete review as the last item if we get to it? If not, then we can just table it for the next meeting.
Yeah, that's
Is that,
good.
does everybody agree?
Yeah, put it in the packet, put everything you want, let's,
Uh,
we're gonna have to get through it sooner or later.
Yeah, so,
Let's start.
Chair, are you, would you be accepting of the way we did this ordinance in giving you the copy of the code and then coming back with, and then we'll just keep going through
Yeah,
through the chapter and then just adopt it all at once?
Yes.
We'll advance this one, and then when we get to this section, we'll just skip over it.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
because we have too cumbersome of a too complete of a document, and it's handed up to the council for, then there's the question of how much time and ability they'll have to review it, or just, take the staff recommendations. And I think it's probably better on some of these issues, the ones we've been addressing as far as fire-resistant construction and some of the practical elements, that it's brought, handed up in small quantities
Correct.
and more manageable.
Right, but the remainder items in Title IX, I think would be most effective to pass through as one entity.
Right.
Would everybody, okay,
Yeah, yeah.
okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. In that case, then, this meeting is adjourned at 8:06. Yeah, somebody's gonna have to do that.